I'm continuing with Easter themed projects, and in this video, I'll show you how to make this He is Risen display. I've told you this before, but I make things in batches. I took a piece of Padauk, that's not all of it, but I could lay out four on that back heel on the Padauk, and I took a piece of oak that was about 5 inches wide, and by overlapping them I can get four across. On this I cut it down to whatever that length is, about 30 inches I think. I'll do, and the figures I have yet to lay out, but I'll do those soon. I'm going to start with the two hills. I will need pilot holes for this, the oak one, for the letters He is Risen. So first I'm going to separate these. Those pieces are too long to work with. They're awkward, to say the least. So I will cut them to a more manageable length. I'll drill the pilot holes, and then we'll come over to the scroll saw. I decided to start with the smaller hill with the words He is Risen cut into the side. This is 3/4 inch red oak, and my experience tells me to use a number 9 blade for these cuts. If you're new to scroll sawing and still unsure about what size blade to use for a particular project, I'll leave a link on the screen and in the description to my video on how to choose the right size blade for the task. You can see the advantages of the Padauk scroll saw as I work on this piece. You just lift up the arm and it holds in place while you thread the blade through the pilot hole. Then you insert the blade into the upper holder and tighten it with the thumb screw. No tools are needed, as is the case with some scroll saws. The inside cuts for the letters will be the most difficult part of this project. You'll need to drill pilot holes big enough for the blade to fit through, but small enough to fit within the confines of the letters. I believe I used a 3/32 drill bit to clear this number 9 Pegasus modified geometry blade. To cut the letters, you'll have to make a lot of 90-degree turns. This is a skill you'll need to master if you want to create projects on the scroll saw. Part of developing the skill will be learning the best location to put the pilot holes. If you can get the pilot hole near a corner, you can cut from the pilot hole just a short distance to the corner. Once the blade touches the corner, you back it up very slightly, then you pivot the workpiece without the blade cutting. As soon as the workpiece is facing in the right direction, the next direction you want to cut, you start pushing the blade into the wood again. If you're new at this, I recommend getting some practice on scrap wood before moving on to finished projects. The most critical cuts for this one are for the letter R. If your cut is too wide on the upright part, or if you go too far on the top part of the letter, part of the letter will fall out and it will be noticeable on the finished piece. In places where spacing is critical, like the letter R here, I try to keep my cuts just inside the cut line rather than directly on the line. The corners on your letters are coming out a little bit rounded rather than as sharp 90-degree angles. You can always go back and clean them up with the blade and square them up a little. Here you can see that even people with a lot of experience on the scroll saw, like myself, still goof up occasionally. I didn't tighten the blade enough in the lower holder and it worked its way loose over time. Sometimes I notice the blade feels loose, but this time I didn't. The blade got bent up pretty badly, so it's now unusable and I have to toss and replace it. Blade wear and occasional breakage goes along with scroll sawing. This is why you always want to have a supply of blades on hand. While cutting the letter R, something happened which will occur occasionally while you're making inside cuts. As I was cutting the right top part of the letter, the waste piece fell through the cut and ended up at the table level. It got stuck in the opening for the blade and kept me from pivoting the workpiece to complete the cut. I loosened the top blade holder, removed the waste piece, then threaded the blade back through and continued cutting. This is one of those places where the foot switch comes in handy, as I was able to quickly stop the saw as soon as I realized what had happened and what I needed to do to fix the problem. With the letters all completed, I moved on to cut the cave opening from the bottom of the hill. This was an easy, quick cut, leaving me with one long outside cut to complete the smaller hill. When you get to a place like this, it's easy to want to speed things up a bit by putting a little more pressure on the blade. This is not, however, a good idea. Putting extra pressure on the blade can cause it to flex, resulting in an uneven cut. It can also cause the blade to overheat, which may result in burning the wood and or premature blade breakage. Just get in the habit of letting the blade do the work and not trying to unnaturally speed up the process. The oak piece is now complete, so I pulled off the pattern. One of the reasons I like using scroll saw tape is that patterns usually pull off in one piece, leaving no residue behind. The Padauk heel is just one long outside cut, but there are several 90-degree turns for the crosses. As always, I recommend cutting straight up to the intersection, then backing off slightly with the blade while you pivot the workpiece. Then start cutting again in the new direction. Since the tops of the crosses are near the edge of the board, when you get to them, you can keep cutting until you reach the edge. That will create a small waste piece, which you can easily remove. Then you can start cutting straight into the next section. I pulled the tape off the workpiece just like before. By placing the oak piece in front of the Padauk piece, you can see how they contrast nicely yet complement each other. Now it's time to cut the 1/4-inch thick pieces for the figures and the stone that was rolled away from the tune. I went to my box of 1/4-inch stock and found a couple of small pieces of sapele. I thought the color contrasted nicely with the oak, so I used it for the stone that was next to the cave opening. I've found that the easiest way to attach small patterns like this to what are essentially scrap pieces of wood is to use glue sticks. They're inexpensive and you can find them anywhere school supplies are sold. Make sure you get enough glue near the edges of the pattern that it holds down while you're cutting. Afterwards, the patterns pull off, although it may take a little sanding to completely remove the pattern. The inside cuts on this figure are quite small, so I used a 1/16 drill bit to make the pilot hole. I'm using a number 3 Niqua Ultra reverse plate to cut the figures from 1/4-inch maple. I purchased these from Bearwood Supply, which is also my source for the Pegasus scroll saw and blades. I'll leave a link to their website in the description. I'm an affiliate, so if you use the link I provide, I'll receive a commission on any orders you place. Okie dokie, those are the figures. I'll peel off the tape. And we got 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, since we're dealing with German blades here. And I'll cut the rest of them in a little bit, but we can now put together the first one that I've cut out, the whole set. I just used a 1/4 sheet of 150 grit sandpaper to break the edges of the hills so they weren't sharp to the touch. This is a fairly small area that I need to glue, so I use this small bottle to apply the glue and then I'll spread it around with my finger. The bottle originally held Elmer's glue, but once I used that up, I kept the bottle and I refill it from a gallon bottle. The small tip is much more convenient for getting glue into and onto small spaces. The white glue dries clear and it's water soluble, so any that doesn't wipe off my fingers will come off with a little soap and water. For larger areas, I use a bottle with a medium-sized tip, which I also refill from the gallon bottle, and I use a brush to spread the glue around. I added the figures to the front and then set the whole assembly aside for a few minutes to allow the glue to start setting up before I applied clamps. When you first apply glue, the surfaces want to slide around as you add clamps. By waiting a few minutes before clamping, the surfaces are now adhering to each other slightly, and you can turn the screw on an F-clamp without the pieces moving. After the glue dried, I removed the clamps and then took the piece to my homemade paint booth where I applied several coats of spray polyurethane. With all the little nooks and crannies, the spray is much easier to apply than a brush-on finish. I recently made another resurrection scene, and I thought I'd show you both side by side so you could compare them more easily. The one on the left had 3 layers of hills, oak at the back, sapele for the middle layer with the crosses, then another oak layer in front. The scene just completed is on the right, with the back layer holding the crosses cut from Padauk, and the hill saying "He is risen," made from oak. The figures were cut from maple for both displays. I like both displays. How about you? Leave a comment and we can have a little discussion on the subject. I'll leave a link to the video for the scene on the left so you can watch it if you haven't already done so. I'll also leave a link to a scene showing Jesus carrying the cross, which will make a great companion to either of these pieces.